What's up, guys? This is Taking the Field with Stevie Mac, episode 28 now of the podcast, and this is the first episode officially where we can finally dive into these Premier Lacrosse League Championship Series matchups and talk about all the games going on in this opening weekend of the Championship Series from Saturday, July 25th to Sunday, July 26th. And what we're going to do here is really just dive in a little bit to each one of these three matchups, which we'll get to in a minute. And then after we kind of break it all down, I'll give you my pick of who I think will win each one of the three games. Then we'll look at the Twitter poll that I ran on my own personal Twitter account at Stevie Mac Media, where I asked all of you your input on who's going to win each one of those three games. And then I'll kind of intertwine some sports betting into it as well, where I'll give you my bet as to who I would put money on in each one of these games. If I were to bet, which I'm not, but if I did, these would be some of my picks. So we'll get into some of that in just a minute. But let's jump right into it with this opening matchup of the 2020 Championship Series against the Whipsnakes and the Redwoods. Now, the Whipsnakes at minus 137, the Redwoods coming in at plus 115. Keep this in mind when we get to that betting, like I talked about just a second ago. But just to kind of get into this matchup a little bit, the Whipsnakes went 2-1 last season against the Redwoods, including that championship game with Matt Rambo scoring the overtime winner, and then a 17-4 drumming in week 9 against the Redwoods as well. And coming back to Matt Rambo, he tallied 11 goals and 10 assists on 42% shooting against the Redwoods last year, averaging 7 points per game against that Woods defense, which was the most by any player against any opponent in all of 2019. Now, the Redwoods did retool this offseason by acquiring Miles Jones from the Chaos in a trade that sent Sergio Salcido and a draft pick back to the Chaos. And then they also retooled their face-off position as well with the retirement of Greg Renlian by drafting Peyton Smith out of Marist during the collegiate draft. And they also selected Greg Paskoljian in the entry draft. I apologize if I butchered that last name, but we'll move on. But even with some of these additions that they made, they will have one key piece missing from this team, and that is Jules Henningberg at attack for the Redwoods, because he was ruled out by doctors after he had tested positive for COVID-19 previously a few weeks back, but he has since been cleared of his symptoms and everything like that to be able to play. But the doctors did recommend that he skip it because there were some heart concerns there because of the fact that he had COVID previously, and kind of jumping back in to this championship series and playing in that kind of high intensity physical environment that these guys are going to be in. I mean, for the last 3 days, they've been doing two-a-days for 6 practices or so in the last 3 days or so. They just didn't think it was a good thing for him at this time to be playing right after getting cleared. So he will be out, and that means entering in his position will be Brendan Gleason from the reserve list. But the Whipsnakes also kind of did a little reshaping of their roster this year, and a lot of that is because of the fact that they lost a ton of offense to the expansion draft, including Ryan Drenner, Connor Kelly, and Drew Snyder, because the Whips and Jim Stagnita really chose to focus more on protecting their defense and keeping that core defense in front of Kyle Bernlohr intact, which meant that they had to leave some of those offensive guys like Kelly and Drew Snyder, and, you know, specifically Ryan Drenner too, in the late game heroics that we saw from him last year. Those guys had to be unprotected in order to save some of those defensive guys like Earhart. But they were able to retool that offense around Matt Rambo by bringing guys like Zed Williams and Brad Smith, along with what we can assume would be a larger role for a guy like Jay Carlson at attack as well. But they also made a trade by getting Max Tuttle from the Chrome in exchange for James Barkley and a couple other pieces. So with all these kind of moving parts that we've seen by both these teams in this offseason and kind of reshaping their rosters here in 2020, I would say that my pick for this game is going to be the Redwoods in a bit of a shootout, probably somewhere close to like 14-13, maybe 13-12, somewhere around there. But the line for this game is the Whipsnakes minus 1.5, so clearly DraftKings is predicting that this game is going to be very, very close, as I think a lot of us would say as well. And as of right now, with the Twitter poll pick, the pick right now is the Redwoods, but that poll will be going up until the start almost of that Whipsnakes Redwoods game. So you guys can check that out, as I mentioned, on my Twitter account at Stevie Mac Media, to vote on which one you think will win that game, as well as the next matchups that I'll get into in just a second. But if I were placing a bet on this game, which I said I'm not, but if I were, my bet would be the Redwoods plus 115, because I think that they still have a lot there offensively to where they can score and score in a hurry. And then defensively, I think they're going to be one of the toughest teams to face in this championship series. But I think more so than any of that, without Jules Heningberg, their leader of that team and the offense more specifically, I think these guys are going to be super fired up to get some revenge on the Whipsnakes for that championship game last year. They're going to want to play for Jules, and they're just going to come out super, super hot. So I got the Redwoods in that one, as does the Twitter poll right now. Then we take a look at the Chaos versus the Chrome. The Chaos minus 125, the Chrome at plus 105. So Tim Soudan enters his first season at the helm of the Chrome, and he really wasted no time in rebuilding this roster in the way that he wanted it. He traded midfielder Romar Dennis to the Atlas for a third-round pick in 2021, and also acquired James Barkley from the Whipsnakes as part of that Max Tuttle deal that I mentioned just a minute ago. He also traded for attackman Matt Gaudette from the Chaos, who was selected in that collegiate draft by Andy Towers, in exchange for that Atlas 2021 third-round pick. He then went to work in the waiver wire and signed guys like attackman Jesse King and Brendan Kavanaugh, as well as LSM Eli Salama. He also selected a couple defensemen by taking Jesse Bernhardt as part of the entry draft, and then finally selecting defenseman Reese Eddy in the collegiate draft. And now all these guys that I just rattled off will be part of that Chrome Championship Series roster here over the next 2 weeks. But on the flip side to that, the Chaos really had a totally different mindset to this offseason as the Chrome did, which I guess they can do when they had the best regular season record in 2019. But they didn't really do a whole lot of moving with their pieces that they had, so you have to think that Andy Towers just figured, hey, if it's not broke, why fix it? Because the only moves they really made were trading Miles Jones to the Redwoods for Sergio Salcido in that 2021 pick, and then also trading Gaudette to the Chrome for another 2021 pick. But with that, the Chaos still have guys like Justin Fields, Miles Thompson, Josh Byrne, and Jake Fricaro on offense, but now you factor in guys like Salcido, Austin Stotts, and Curtis Dixon into that offense as well. And then defensively, you have arguably one of the best goalies in the league in Blaze Reardon, and also on defense, you have the Bomb Squad, who is always looking to add some excitement to these games and get looks on offense as well in transition. Guys like Jared Newman, Troy Ray will always make the games a little more interesting when their number gets called. So my pick for this game is actually going to be the Chrome in a bit of an upset here. I just think that they're going to come out firing under Tim Soudan with this new look and new feel to their team. And ironically enough, the Twitter poll as of right now at about 4:30 on July 24th, the day before the games, the Twitter poll is actually currently tied between the two. But if I had to place a bet on one of these teams, I would take the Chrome at plus 105. And then we finish off with the Sunday game on July 26th between the Atlas at minus 132 and the Water Dogs at plus 110. So I read somewhere recently that the Atlas actually have the most players returning to their roster in 2019, even after they lost guys like Steve DiNapoli, Ryan Conrad, Kieran McCarl, and Noah Richard to the Water Dogs, but they were able to bring in guys like Romar Dennis from the Chrome, Rob Pinnell and Craig Schick through the entry draft, and they drafted Brian Costabile number 2 overall in the collegiate draft behind Grant Ament to the Archers. And they also were able to sign Jeremy Thompson off waivers when he was released just a few days prior by Andy Towers and the Chaos. And I've said it a million times on this podcast, and I'm sure over the next 2 weeks I'll say it about 10 more times at least, but the Atlas midfield is ridiculously deep on offense, because you have guys like Paul Rabel, Joel Tinney, who's on my fantasy team, Connor Busick, John Crawley. Now you add in guys like Brian Costabile and Romar Dennis. This offense is just going to be humming with guys shooting from all over the place, offense just being generated from literally everywhere on the field. It is going to be so much fun to watch how these guys all play together. Then you look at some of their short stick D-mids, where really last year they were down to guys like Kevin Unterstein and Jake Richard with a little bit of Steve DiNapoli mixed in there as well. But one of the things that Ben Rubior said that he wanted to do with this roster is build more of a two-way midfield so that these guys can get up and down, they can get in transition, they can get quick shots on offense, but at the same time be able to run back on defense and fill in the hole. So what he did was, now he still has Unterstein and Richard. Obviously, like I mentioned, Steve DiNapoli's gone now, but now he brings in guys like Costabile, Romar Dennis, and Jeremy Thompson that can play both ways if needed. And even looking at guys like John Crawley and Joel Tinney, they can play at either end of the field as well if you need them to. But the thing with the Atlas for me is that their defense really scares me, and the loss of Tucker Durkin from testing positive for COVID-19 makes me even a little more nervous than I already was with this defense. But Callum Robinson should fill in that crease position pretty nicely, filling in for Tucker Durkin. But that just means that guys like Austin Pafani will then have to fill in for Callum Robinson's spot out on the wing that he is now vacating. And for me, specifically with Pafani, his play last year kind of scared me at times. It was a little bit tough to watch because it seemed like he almost got lost a little bit out there defensively in some of his matchups. He kind of seemed confused as to when to slide, when not to slide, and different things like that. It just seemed like his timing and his feel for it was a little bit off. But at the same time, you also kind of have to give him a little bit of a break, because he did draw some pretty tough matchups last season, one including when he had to match up with Jules Henningberg one-on-one in, I believe it was the second game after Henningberg had been traded over to the Redwoods. So hopefully he can kind of figure it out this season and help out that defense a little bit more. But then when you look at the Water Dogs are definitely going to have something to prove this season, and they'll be looking to do it by starting out the season by taking down the Atlas in convincing fashion. Their team is well balanced, it seems like, all over the field. Where you look at attack and they have guys like Kieran McCardle, Ryan Drenner, and Wes Berg. And then at midfield, their midfield is held down by Connor Kelly, Drew Snyder, and Kyle McClancy, and Ryan Conrad can also play a little bit of both ways as well, I would assume, for them. And then on defense, you've got some bruisers like Brody Merrill and Noah Richard. And then at faceoff, a guy like Jake Withers is a very solid option for them at the faceoff stripe. And they really have two really solid goalies in Charlie Cipriano and Matt DeLuca. And that was a position going into training camp that a lot of people thought we'd see a very heavy position battle at between the two of them. So it'll be interesting to see what they do on Sunday and in the games following for the championship series. But my pick for this matchup would have to be the Atlas in this one. I think that, at least from an offensive standpoint, especially through that midfield, but also looking at the attack with guys like Pennell, Law, and Ryan Brown, even Chris Cloutier coming out of the box at times, I would assume. I think offensively there's just going to be too much for the Water Dogs to handle, and that new defense, because you have to remember, these guys have not, for the most part, played together yet at this level, so they're still trying to get to know each other a little bit and kind of build that chemistry on the field. So I think that overall the Atlas will just be a little too much for the Water Dogs to handle here. The Twitter poll also currently has the Atlas as the winner in this one, but my bet, if I was picking a bet for this weekend, which again I'm not, but if I was, I would again take the underdog in this one. I would take the Water Dogs at plus 110 for that. But those are my picks for this weekend. I've got the Redwoods, the Chrome, and the Atlas in this opening weekend of PLL action. And that'll do it for episode 28 of Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Make sure to like, comment, and share on this post. Also, check out any past episodes of the podcast that I did. I've done a ton of coverage over the past month or two on the PLL Championship Series and everything that's gone into it, from sports betting to fantasy lacrosse and all that good stuff. Check that stuff out by searching Taking the Field with Stevie Mack on SoundCloud, YouTube, and Podchaser. And that'll do it. I'll see you guys later.